Welcome back to my channel, The Gentle Flamingo, and welcome to part 4 of my nerdy-gurdy build that's all about the wheel. This is one of the most important parts of the Gurdy, so I'll be taking my time, making sure I do it mostly right. I'll start where I left off at the end of part 3, with the Gurdy clamped to a stable surface and the wheel installed on the crankshaft. Just in case you're wondering what my stable surface is, it's one end of the table saw out in the shop. Don't worry, the blade is dropped and it's not plugged in. You can see that my homemade wood filler dried very bumpy and rough, so I'll start my wheel shaping with a good sanding using 60 grit sandpaper. I'm not going to use the sandpaper on its own, though. I have an improvised sanding block to wrap it around so that it stays in one spot. While I'm sanding and scraping, I'll keep an eye on the alignment of my tools on this side of the wheel and the shape of the rim on this side. This will make a little more sense in just a bit. Let me sand the worst of the bumps off right quick. When I place my sanding block, I'm going to watch from above to make sure that it's lined up perpendicular to the sides of the wheel slot. Make sure I have some pressure on the wheel itself, get a good grip on it, and start turning the wheel. I can usually get about 10 or so turns before I need to move the block a tiny bit closer for more effective sanding. And now for a different view so I don't have to reach around the camera. I'm just holding the sanding block in place for now. I'll do something different when I start scraping the wheel. And here we are after sanding for a bit. The rim is much smoother, but if you'll watch here, you can see how uneven it still is. So let's move on to the scraping. I'll be using a utility blade for this part. Do be careful with these, they are very sharp. I'm going to position it just like I did the sanding block, making sure the blade edge is perpendicular to the sides of the wheel slot. I'm eyeballing this, but you could use something with a right angle corner if you want to be really sure. Now, unlike the sanding block, I'm not going to try to hold this blade still with my hand. First of all, it's a lot of hand strain, and second, the unevenness of the wheel at this point can push the blade out of alignment, and my grip strength is not enough to keep it from doing that. So after I get the blade placed, I'll hold it there with a clamp. If you listen, you can tell that my wheel is not perfectly round. You can hear the high and the low spots as you shape it. I'll just keep working at it. This is perhaps the longest process of constructing the nerdy-gurdy. I think it took about 4 or 5 hours for me to shape this wheel, which seems like a long time, but like I said before, this is perhaps one of the most important parts of the instrument, and I want to get it right. So I'll take my time, be methodical, I'll check my alignment constantly, and realign my blade frequently. I should have kept a tally of how many times I readjusted the blade, but I didn't. I've seen posts where makers set up a power drill or use a lathe to shape the wheel. I'm a little leery of doing that since you can really take off too much too quickly before you realize it and get too small of a wheel. So I'm going to be patient, I'm not going to get greedy, and I'll listen to and watch my wheel. Plus, you should really do your shaping with the wheel on the Gurdy to make sure that it matches the particular alignment of your construction. The lathe, although it may be level and centered, it might not match what you've done with your Gurdy, and you'll end up with a crooked wheel once it's actually on the Gurdy. So this is about halfway through the shaping process. While I've been doing this, I've been keeping an eye on this end of the slot and comparing the edge with the rim of the wheel. So far, the rim is mostly parallel to it, but if you watch, you'll see the width of the dark line changes in places. I still have a low spot that I need to get out, so back to scraping. You can hear that it's much better than when I started, but they're still not quite there yet. I do move the blade around quite a bit while I'm doing this. Scraping like this will dull the blade, so I move to a fresh part every now and then. I actually switched to a second blade at some point because the first one got too dull. And here's another check of the rim to make sure it's still going well. It's starting to get there. Oh, so close! Still one little low spot though. Here's a little trick. If you're having trouble watching the alignment because it's dark under the top of the Gurdy, you can take a lighter colored material and place it underneath to reflect light up through the wheel slot. I'm using a bit of leftover spruce, but a piece of paper works just fine too. And one more listen. There may still be the tiniest of tiny low spots, but I'm satisfied with it. You can hear contact with the blade all around the rim of the wheel. One last check to make sure everything is as it should be. It can be a little hard to see the relationship between the rim of the wheel and the end of the wheel slot, so to be able to see it better, I'll frame the wheel with a couple of pieces of wood, so I'm just seeing that thin white line. Watching it as closely as I can, it doesn't change much. And now, just to put a ruler on it, let's measure the wobble again to make sure that it's stayed within a millimeter. It has. Now I'll measure how much rise and fall the rim of the wheel has. Not very much, good deal. Just to show you what I ended up with, from the top, it looks like there's about an equal amount of space between the wheel and the wheel slot on all sides, and then just enough space on the bottom to clear the back of the Gurdy. Now let's get the wheel off. Do a bit of sanding to the sides to make sure everything is smooth, and head to the house to work on the veneer. I'm silly. Remember how I marked the wheel with a pencil to make sure that I put it on the hub the same way every time? Yeah, I sanded that off. I had to go back and watch part 3 to figure out where that line was supposed to be. Oops. To avoid this happening again when I paint this thing, I'll mark inside the center this time. Don't be like me. Make a mark that will stick around. Here's another oopsie. While I was shaping the wheel, the hex nut came off the handle, like I said it might. So I got some thread lock to hopefully keep that from happening again. I'm using the blue thread lock, which will hold the hex nut in place, but I'll still be able to get it off with hand tools if and when I need to. Do be careful with this stuff, it's really runny. I brought in a socket wrench to tighten this up, but with the thread lock on there, maybe finger tight will work well enough. I guess we'll see. This is a pretty easy fix, so if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. Here's the piece of veneer I'll be using for my wheel rim. It's a bit of oak veneer that I salvaged off some plywood my dad was using to build cabinets for my sister. I soaked the plywood in water for a little bit and used a plastic scraper to gently remove the veneer. I don't have a video of that since I did it while building the Gurdy in the rough, and that was before I started this channel. Something to think about when choosing your veneer: try to make sure that the grain is nice and even. You can see some irregularity or darker areas on this piece up here. These areas can be weaker than the rest of the veneer and can break easily. It works alright for a piece of flat plywood, but not so much for the rim of a hurdy-gurdy wheel. I had to redo the veneer on that first Gurdy because of that, so avoid irregular grained veneer if you can. Alright, on to the bending. I've selected 3 progressively smaller pots, with the smallest being about the same diameter as my wheel. I've put in enough water to cover the veneer once it's in the pot. Well, I thought I did. I ended up needing to add a little water to 2 of the pots. Also, your biggest pot will take longer to heat than the 2 smaller ones, so don't turn them on all at once like I did. This video is full of mistakes. Anyway, once the water is boiling in the biggest pot, I'll feed the veneer in like a dry piece of spaghetti. Go slowly so you don't accidentally break the veneer. I had to get some tongs to adjust it in the pot so that it was all underwater, and I played with it for quite a bit before realizing I just needed to add a little more water to the pot. While I wait for my brain to catch up, I'll turn the next pot on to heat up. Now that the second pot is boiling, I'll repeat the process. And now, after a bit of musical pots so you can see what's going on, it's time for the same process with the smallest pot. Handle with care, of course, because it's hot. Again, I fuss with it for a little bit before realizing that I need more water in the pot. Alright, there we go, good enough. After letting the veneer sit in the hot water for a little bit, I poured the water off, clamped the veneer against the sides of the pot with some clothespins, and now I'll set this aside and let it dry. Alright, after sitting beside the wood heater all night, it is dry. You can see how it holds its shape, but still has a little give in it. You may have noticed that the ends are a little warped, but that will turn out not to be a problem. To start fitting the veneer onto the wheel, I'll cut one end at an angle, wrap it around my wheel kind of tightly, and use the cut edge to mark the other end. I'll cut along the outside of that line because I don't want to take off too much at once and have to start over with another piece of veneer. And then put it around again. Yep, still a little overlap. You want the two ends of the veneer to meet with no overlap, so I'll just keep working on it. You can see that this piece of veneer is quite a bit wider than my wheel. That's just because that was the width of the board I took it off of, and not really a conscious choice of mine, although I do think it's a good idea to use veneer that's a little wider than your wheel. Okay, I think I got it. It's a little hard for you to see, I'm sorry, but I think it's good. Time to glue it on. I like to use a brush to apply glue to the rim of the wheel, but I guess there's really no right way to do it. I usually just spread glue around with my finger, but I can be a little more precise with this with a brush. I'm going to get a nice even coat all the way around the rim. And then apply the veneer. In the assembly instructions, it says to use zip ties to hold the veneer in place, but I like to use rubber bands. They apply even pressure all around the wheel. Once I press the veneer into place by hand, I'll use a couple of light bands to hold it in place while I check that it's aligned the way I want it. Then I'll put on a thicker rubber band right at the edge. I'm sorry I keep getting this off camera, but there are times when I really need to look at it closely. When I'm putting on these first rubber bands, I like to make sure they lie flat with no twists in them, so I keep bringing it closer to me so I can get those twists out and position the rubber band where I want it. I'm kind of picky about that, I guess. I put a bunch of rubber bands on this thing. Kind of like those videos where they put rubber bands around a melon and it splits it open. The more rubber bands you have, the more pressure you get. I don't really know if this method is any better than using zip ties. I just feel like I have more control over it this way. Experiment and see which way is better for you. Alright, that ought to be enough rubber bands, right? There are a few spots here where it looks like the veneer doesn't contact the rim of the wheel. That's actually some unevenness of my homemade wood filler right at the edge. It sounds bad to say it, but it's really just an appearance thing and will be an easy fix. But first I'll let this sit and dry overnight. And now that it's dry, I'll take all these rubber bands off and then trim this edge down even with the side of the wheel. Then I'll mask off the veneer and fill in those little gaps with some more wood glue. The good old wood heater will dry that out pretty quickly. I didn't film this, but just to let you know how I cleaned up the edges, I used an X-Acto knife to carefully trim off the excess glue and then sanded it down with my sanding block using the 60 grit and then a little bit with the 150 grit. Now I'll pop the wheel back onto the Gurdy and make sure it's still in the round. I didn't film this since it's the same process as the initial shaping and didn't take as long since there wasn't much to fix. Just one little high spot near the join that didn't take much scraping to get out. So here's my finished wheel. I've remarked my alignment spot with a bit of green paint so I can see it when I'm putting the wheel back on the Gurdy, but it won't be noticeable once the wheel's in place. And here is my wheel in all its glory on the Gurdy as it is now. This is a permanent installation. I don't intend to remove the wheel again. If you remember, I do have a piece of vinyl electrical tape around the end of the threaded rod inside that inside bearing. That provides enough friction to hold this thing in place while I work on the rest of the Gurdy. Alright, that's it for part 4. Before I go, I do want to stress that all the messing around I did with wood filler and extra glue is not in the assembly instructions. It was just something that I was using to try to correct my mistake of gluing the two halves of the wheel together a little crookedly. But I think this wheel will at least be functional, and I hope you found something in this video that was helpful to you. Thank you for joining me for this video. I hope you'll join me again in 2 weeks from now as I continue to put this Gurdy together. Bye. Hello, CJ. Are you by the fire? Are you by the fire? Are you a sweetheart? You're a sweetheart. Yes, you are. Oh, you are. She's a sweet girl. Aren't you? Yeah. You should get that camera out of my face. Look at that nose. Look at that nose. We love you. We love you. What is it? What are you growling at? You just want attention, don't you? You just want attention. You should do. You're a sweetheart. You're a sweetheart. Alright, I gotta get to work. Well, I can't be petting you all the time. No? Can I? No? Yeah?